Greetings, old friends. Today, let us take a look at this Brescia Museum longsword with a somewhat somber tune as the last commission piece of Master Purna Darnal before his untimely passing last June. Brother Nathaniel designed this sword based on a well-preserved mid-15th century longsword housed at the Museo delle Armi in Brescia, Italy. And this sword has been the inspiration of many modern reproductions, such as the famed albeit museum line Brescia Spadona and the Lockwood Brescia longsword. And you can see an example of that model owned by Brother Nathaniel. This was the second iteration of the reproduction made by Purna last June. As the first example didn't really meet the expectation, even though it was still a well-made piece. Brother Nathaniel commissioned the second one in late June, and Purna had worked on about 2 weeks on this commission before he had a tragic car accident. So this sword was basically 95% finished by the time. It was only lacking the final sharpening and scabbard, which was made posthumously. I'm not going to do test cutting or any critique on this sword, as it seemed slightly disrespectful to a master's last custom commission, but I will talk about its history with Purna's commissions, also the traits of this specific sword, which makes it slightly different from the original that housed at the Brescia Museum. As you can see, this is a very broad sword at the base, coming in at close to 6 centimeters wide, which is about 2 3/8 of an inch. And it tapers down quite evenly. At midpoint, it's already lost about 1/3 of the width at 40 millimeters. At 2 inches from the tip, it's down to 20 millimeters. So it's kind of a linear profile narrowing up to this point, where it picks up the pace and narrows to an acute tip, which is very interesting in terms of mass distribution. If you look at the thickness and the cross section, it is what deviates the most from the original, whereas the original has a very thin blade at the base, less than 5 millimeters. This one features 2 somewhat striking edges flanking the fuller, and the maximum thickness at the base is at 7.6 millimeters, which is quite an upgrade from the Brescia Museum example. However, the cross-sectional difference makes up the, shall we say, mass distribution, as the original has a very beefy, close to lenticular cross-section, and it has a very stout secondary bevel. That's not really the effect of sharpening, it's just a design of the cross-section. As you can see, it tapers to an beveled edge, half a centimeter from the edge on both sides, and even on the upper portion past the fuller, it's still somewhat rounded. It doesn't feature a very striking, very prominent central ridge, whereas this example by Purna, all the edges, flanking the fullers and past the fuller, there's a very prominent central ridge. They are all just well defined, and the cross section is a strict diamond cross section from these edges to the edge. There's even a little concave grind, and all the edges are properly apple-seated. So they are slightly different. If you look at the example housed at the Museo delle Armi, you can see that on the upper portion, other than the soft central ridge, it's almost like a lenticular cross-section. So there's definitely some differences, and also the transition to the tip. The original is a little bit longer, and it goes to a slightly more acute point. Still, this is a very good facsimile of the original's profile and just general sword-making philosophy. And I was told that the blade on the original was made in Passau, in modern southern Germany, which is a very famous sword-making center in the Middle Ages. Some speculation said that the hilt on the original was made in Brescia or elsewhere in Italy, and this is a kind of a bastard sword, whereas a southern German blade married to an Italian-made hilt. If you look at the hilt, this is the most iconic part of the sword. You can see that it features the identical crossguard design, straight crossguard, strongly tapered on the thickness, but it features a hexagonal cross-section, meaning that it's flat where it interacts with your hand, and on the side that face the blade. However, on the side, you have two soft ridges, and it just gradually tapers down to this refined upswell curve. So if you imagine a blade opposing you comes down, hit the crossguard, it cannot glide off, right? Whereas this curve will just catch it. So you will have some easier time doing binding, grinding, parrying, defending. And a very long grip also is a defining feature of this kind of longsword, as many mid to late 15th century longswords have relatively short grip in today's standards. And it terminates into this very iconic sandstopper pommel. It has 8 sides and is strongly concaved, right, hollow ground on each facet, kind of like a sandstopper, right, on those perfume bottles. And you can see on the example, it's pinned over here. It's one piece pommel and it's pinned with a tan going through. It's a very well-ground pin, mostly rounded, but it conforms to the octagonal cross-section of the pommel. And then the grip features this tapered shape, right, from the crossguard to the pommel. Where it meets the pommel is relatively narrow. On the upper portion, it's still rather, slender if you compare to many other modern longswords. But if you look at a museum example, which is quite well preserved, you can imagine it's right now is 600 years old. It still has this impact grip with wood core, and even the leather wrapping is quite well preserved. However, you can imagine in this many centuries it had shrunken, therefore the dimension might not be the same as the original. If you use the original photos as a reference, obviously the result would be a little more slender than what it would have been when it was made new. So I would say that this upper portion of the grip is quite thin and narrow. However, it has this hexagonal cross-section, which is slightly different from the original, which is now oval. And near the pommel, the original is mostly cylindrical due to the tapering. Also due to the need to meet the dimension of the sandstopper pommel. The stock is rather thin, obviously. In the center, you see this very iconic spacer. That's probably part as the wood core of the grip. On the original, if you look closely, you can see some risers or grooves carved onto the central spacer. It's not present on this example, but I will say that overall, the aesthetics, the proportion is extremely similar to the original sword. And when you use it, it gives you general space to separate both of your hands, do a lot of complex techniques, unlike many period long swords that has basically your two hands bunched together. So I would say that in terms of handling, this is definitely preferable, well, to me at least. If you look at the grip, you can see a faint sign of cord impression all around the entire length of the grip. However, it's not very prominent or striking comparing to many other modern reproductions. It's definitely there, and you can feel the difference in the texture. It gives you a better grip, which is definitely appreciated because this is a rather thin grip. If you look at the grip, retention, and you can see there's some room for you to turn, but not a lot. It can lock into your hand rather well, and the indexing is also rather easy. You can look at the side of the grip. On one side, it features this skived leather theme. The skiving is rather nicely done. What's interesting is that it comes around wrapping all around rather than an over wrap. So it meets each other here where it's skived. Therefore, there's no edge that's sticking out on one side because it meets on both sides. It's rather comfortable to hold on to. I think this grip leather color and scabbard color fits the overall theme of vampire slaying rather well. And Brother Nathaniel happened to send this one along with a few other pieces. One is a vampire slaying Bowie knife. The other one is a whip in Castlevania style. So altogether, I should mention there's also a throwing cross. It's a rather fitting kit for a vampire slayer. This example weighs 1,560 grams, which is about 2 or 3 ounces heavier than the original. But I would say even at 3 pounds and 7 ounces, this is a rather lively sword. However, when you swing it, you can feel the heft, especially in the center, right? Definitely it's a war longsword rather than a nimble dueling one. Quite substantial. The deviation in the cross section than the original pretty much makes the feel, the mass distribution, somewhat different from the original. We can hardly tell how different that is, but if you just use the point of balance as a guiding principle, you can see that this is at more than 4 inches from the guard, whereas the original has it around 3.5 inches. So a little bit more hilt heavy than this example. Distal taper is quite stout, right? A little bit surprising coming from Purna, as he usually implements concave distal taper, meaning that it narrows down more dramatically in the lower half than the top half, which is, usually the case. However, I know on the original, because it's already very thin, under 5 millimeters at the base, because it's so wide, it's rather linear in the thinning down, right? This one comes down from 7.6 millimeters down to under 6 millimeters past the termination of the fuller at midpoint. And then due to this very prominent central ridge, it further slims down, but it still terminates at 4.5 millimeters near the tip, which is very beefy. And this gives the feel of a very substantial war longsword. You can feel the mass all the way to the tip. Even though it's not fatiguing or clumsy, it's not a heavy longsword. I should mention that the blade length is at 34.5 inches, so it's on the shorter end of the spectrum in terms of longsword's reach. It should be a very proficient cutter due to the very broad blade profile, even on the central part to the ideal cutting portion, which is at about 3/5 of the blade length over here. It's still around 3.5 centimeters wide, so it has a very good bevel depth. Also, there's a slightly concave grind going on here, makes the edges relatively thin, but it still has this apple seating. I can see the edges are 95% done, but it doesn't have the final honing due to Master Purna's untimely passing. But anyone with even a modicum of sharpening skill will be able to take this to shaving sharp in a matter of 5 minutes or so. I opt to not do that, as this is kind of a memento for Brother Nathaniel. Therefore, I don't want to sharpen this sword's edges and mar the finish, ruin the sentimental value of this sword. I have no doubt it will be a fearsome cutter, as many Purna's recent commission turned out to be, and you can easily bring them to cutting competitions to to win some laurel, he usually provided very adequate edges, often shaving sharp, well apexed, but has a very strong edge geometry to ensure durability as well. It comes with this posthumously made scabbard, which is in the same style as most Purna Darnal or Great Gurkha Kukri's commissions. A very heavy duty, very thick wood core, and that has this striking sanguine leather to match the grip. Features 2 pieces of furniture, one throat piece with a heart perforation cut out, very iconic to Brother Nathaniel's designs, and shape, also with heart-shaped perforation, and a flower bud shape termination, which is another iconic design when you look at Brother Nathaniel and Purna Darnal's collaborations. It fits the sword rather well, very smooth drawing, no rattling, doesn't come out. Drawing is still very smooth. I think this is a good opportunity to say goodbye to Master Purna. He had done hundreds of custom commissions for sword friends around the world, and he was a sword friend himself. Fortunately, if you look at today's Great Gurkha Kukri, his own business that was picked up by his widow and his daughter, they did a good job managing the business. They are still working on custom commissions, mostly shorter ones, less complex ones. But the most recent custom kukri designed by Brother Nathaniel turned out to be an extremely pleasant piece. I'm sure Purna is smiling to his family in heaven, or the afterlife, or the cycle of life, no matter what religion and belief you hold. And as the last piece of commission, Purna demonstrated his lifelong dedication and learning at sword making. And I hope this is a proper opportunity to say goodbye to a friend. Thank you for sending this piece, Brother Nathaniel. It's always been a pleasure. And I hope in the future we will be able to do more collaborations. And if you find any value or entertainment out of this video, please like and subscribe.